Beware the Ides of March. Wait. It's still February. This isn't even the right Caesar. Hello. My name is Brandon Wheeler, and welcome to my channel. I'm an indie author, and have a strong mouth because heat injury when I was in the army. Can't talk right unless I'm biting down something. Moving on. And it's just for anyone watching, the first time watching. Moving on. All right, I have finally finished this history book that I started in early January. It's The Life of Rome's First Emperor, Augustus Caesar, by Anthony Everett, best-selling author of Cicero, which I don't know if it's the Cicero thing. There's plenty of different Ciceros. So, why did I want to read this book? Well, my brother was about to donate a bunch of books and everything. I saw this, and I was like, let me read it. So, it's a little different thing to read for history and everything like that. I got another history book I'm going to read soon. So, finally finished this. It's about Augustus's rise to power and who he was and everything like that, and how it's about him, but it also gives a lot of detail because in order to talk about Augustus, you have to talk about a lot of detail about how Rome worked, just how they're like the culture of Rome and different things like that. It's very weird, but I'll get into that. It's mostly just a review about the history and everything about it. So I do like reading some history from time to time. And I've actually never really read anything outside of Rome besides this. Now, one thing it mentions from a biblical point of view, because I am a Christian and everything, and it mentions Caesar Augustus by name and stuff. Augustus happened to do a type of census of the entire empire for about every 5 years. So that can give a time frame of like, okay, depending when Jesus was born, because when the information got to Judea and everything's like, all right, interesting. It doesn't actually mention anything from a biblical account except it mentions a Herod of Judea, which be one of the Herods and everything, who during Cleopatra's time is like wisely said like, I'm not gonna deal with you, Cleopatra. I'm good. That's about the only mention of Judea and stuff because there's different provinces and areas that Rome was dealing with. So it it gets a little confusing with all the different names that Romans do. It's just kind of like, oh yeah, their first name is Gaius, and then become Octavian, then he could become Augustus. Then it's like every single thing the Romans do, it just adds more names to like their stuff because how the Senate works and how it votes and how it gets names and stuff like that. Like he has a daughter eventually out of all the different marriages and stuff. He has a daughter named Julia and like a different daughter named Julia, because that way it's be kind of like from the Julius line. And he also adopts his wife on his on his will and everything, and that changes her name to Julia from Livia, and it's just like, huh? Like, the Roman culture with all that is just gets gets weird. Um, Actually, I will say, even though it's about Augustus, seeing a more insight for again, according to this author, because I know nothing about him outside of this. Besides, I guess he does a lot of history stuff and everything like that. He does highlight a lot of different Roman stuff and everything, like different Senate stuff. What some things about the culture, lifestyle, and everything. How Augustus really tried to reform Rome back to what he felt like a better way towards its roots, more like modest and different things like that. Like one thing about the Roman attitudes and everything that he details is that they could, well, especially the men, they could basically sleep with whoever they wanted to sleep with because, hey, you want to screw your slave servant? Go ahead, no one cares because from a Roman thing, if you're a slave and stuff, that's okay. Even whether it be man or woman, you can do whatever you want, but don't you dare do that to another free Roman because that gets in trouble. That gets problematic. Not that it didn't stop people from doing things, but it does get problematic, especially when some of those people are married women and that you're doing this and that. Despite Anthony being all over the place at different times, even though he still loved his one of his wives, Livia, that he stayed with most of his life. Um, I mean, for a woman like one of his daughters, Julia, starting to sleep around, have different lovers and stuff of her own after everything, don't do that. That gets shameful and everything. It's just kind of like, hmm, interesting. It's just different things like that. Seeing the attitudes, like, oh, this was really the Roman thing. Oh, okay. It doesn't get into like how the Roman armies work and stuff. It does detail campaigns and stuff, which is a big part of everything. Like during the early part of Augustus's life, which it also would affect him seemingly, is that he would at different parts of stress he would have issue all of a sudden. Uh, he would take ill all of a sudden, and his friend, even some of his friends, would start to be like think it might be psychological because he would always come down with these illnesses around these like different campaigns and stuff. Some would say, "Oh, it's cowardice," but for some reason, some sort of psychomatic thing, affecting him and everything like that. And during each time he tried to do something, it was like, okay, interesting. But at least that was more earlier in his reign. I mean, not even during his reign. Of course, he's brought up. You kind of like respect his kind of grand uncle, grandfather, however it is, Julius Caesar, and how he gets to kind of be promoting him and everything and stuff like that. And then when he gets killed, he's trying to go after the people who were responsible of it. It details different. The book details different elements. Here, let me put it right here, so you can see Rome right there. The book details different elements of uh, stuff people he was dealing with, like Pompey the Great and everything. His friend Agrippa, which I noticed his friend being named Agrippa, I was like, okay, I don't exactly remember what, or I don't know what Agrippa means. I don't remember it mentions that, but we know of a Herod Agrippa in Scripture and everything. So I'm wondering, with the word Agrippa being taken from the Roman type way, I'm thinking it's like, did he name him after that Agrippa? Which is possible, because Agrippa was his lifelong general for the longest time, and because it was his closest friend, one of his closest friends as a kid that he grew up and everything. Even he married one of his daughters and had a couple kids and stuff, and tried to still maintain a lineage and everything and stuff. Augustus seemed like the longest Roman emperor to reign. I don't know. But the biggest thing, which is probably this book's like 350, 370 pages stuff with all the acknowledgments and sources and everything like that in the back. I mean, look at this. All these sources and referencing what stuff means and all that. Um, Almost 2/3 of the book deals with his relationship with Mark Antony. Now, Mark Antony, is kind of, famous, I would say, from the Shakespeare things like friends, Romans, countrymen. Well, not living. No, gosh, from Shakespeare thing, I was saying, like, I did not come to praise Caesar, but to bury him. That thing. I was about to go, then I'm going the wrong thing. I got to read some Shakespeare stuff. I need to do that. There, just put it. Stay there. There. I don't know. Rome never stays put. Anyway, but it deals a lot with his relationship with Mark Antony, how they worked together and dealing with how to deal with Pompey and Pompey's sons. Eventually, that would happen, and also dealing with Cleopatra, because Julius Caesar had relations with Cleopatra, but then Mark Antony afterwards was dealing with Cleopatra, and they were both mostly kind of lovers, basically husband and wife in a lot of ways, even though he was technically married to someone else, really, and she was technically married to her brother, Egyptian stuff, Greek, Egyptian, whatever her thing was. And it's just kind of like that whole relationship and stuff like that. The sea battle, like because they worked together for the longest time. Them and this other guy as like these triumvirate consuls over the entire thing of Rome and everything like that. And they did that for several years. But it came apparent, with Antony's rising popularity, Cleopatra not being popular with Rome, um, and Augustus's continued rise and everything with being ruthless and everything with trying to gain, you could say, power and everything, but also being very loyal to friends and stuff. It's just kind of like, well, Anthony's got to go because it seems like he could be a threat to Rome and all that. So they eventually go after Anthony, and Anthony would die, but it doesn't give credence to, because how Cleopatra is rumored to die versus what actually happened to her. Rumors and stuff, it's not really much known with actually what happened, but the famous thing with the snake is what's rumored, and just gets into details of what he did and stuff and everything. Now, I did not know this. There's a lot of things I didn't know, but the one thing I would say interesting is that they kept trying to go into the Rhine. Of course, they wanted to go into Britannia, the island and everything. Gaul, which would be France, different consuls, princeps stuff going on throughout that. one thing that really was interesting is that they tried later on in Augustus's life when he was emperor, or of course, according to the author, he said he just only want to be called princeps, not really emperor per se, although that's not really a thing. But um, is that the in Deutschland, the Germany area and stuff, they would have Grancis Germanus and different things like that. It was interesting that he mentioned that the after multiple times, eventually the Romans would get massacred at this one event, and they would pull back across the Rhine, and then it just became a point where they could have kept going fast, but then they just decided, what, the Rhine would be our natural border. That'd be as far as what Rome could go into Germany, even though probably Rome would want to necessarily go into different parts of Germany and everything, but for at least a while of Augustus's point and everything, and for a long while, the Rhine became like the natural border as far as where Rome could go, as far as that portion. I just find that interesting because it's like, oh, okay, all these different Germanic things and stuff, but that also gives credence to why you could say the language barrier is very different for that reason, probably as well, I surmise. It'd be a guess because the Italian, the Latin based different things, French, Spanish, all comes from, the Latin type of flavor of speaking stuff. And then you look at Germany's thing where, wie geht's, y tu, da da da. Y tu. That's Spanish. German, wie geht's. Oh gosh, why am I having trouble mentioning? Anyway, if you study German and you look at Spanish, it's two completely different things. I know English gets a lot from multiple languages. It's a hybrid type thing from different stuff. Like we have kindergarten as a word. But I noticed that kind of divide of the language stuff. That's something that I thought of, even though it wasn't addressed in the book. I'm just thinking, I wonder if that's why. Because Rome never, he does bring up, if Rome had went past the Rhine and started going past the Rhine like it was the initial goal, what would have happened in changing Europe because of all that stuff that happened? I was like, okay, interesting. But, oh well. Now it doesn't get anything but into any the biblical issues and stuff about dealing with Judea or anything like that. It mentions about these other groups like the Parthians, like these different nations that were causing issues for Rome throughout the entire time, and just kind of like days and ins and outs of the empire, like who to kill, who not to kill, because he was big on freedom of speech until the end of his life, where he was starting to do stuff and different things like that, because he was trying to really have a Roman Republic and give more power to the senates and stuff like that. And it's like, okay, those who are responsible take your lands, different things like that. Uh, I mean, it's the first kind of book I've read that details history of Rome. So I will say it was interesting and everything of that. I have a different history book on a different topic I'm going to be reading next. But as far as everything, good. It's a different type taste and stuff. It took me, again, a month and a half to read. I had to increase my reading of it and everything, suppose the Narnia book, because I really wanted to get it done before March. I really wanted it to be done before March because, I wanted to be able to do that joke of like, wait, it's only February. It's not the Ides of March yet, which is about the 15th. Does it get? No, I don't remember anything about the stuff and everything. It talks about different, kind of religious things the Romans did, different, superstitions. You can say that Augustus, even though he didn't necessarily believe it, but he did it because it's like kind of this and that, and just different stuff. So if you want to get into an insight about who Augustus might have been and kind of like the background culture of Rome during, say, basically first century to early first century, BC, AD, if you want to get it that way, this would be it. That type of idea. So, have you read this book? Have you not read this book? Tell me what you think about the book and everything, and let me know. I don't know. What do you think? Tell me your stuff about Rome. Unlike a lot of people, or a lot of guys like the meme and stuff, I don't think about the Roman Empire every day. Even when I was reading this book, I wasn't thinking about the Roman Empire every day. I got different stuff I'm trying to work on with things for that. So, alrighty. Well, I will see you in the next one. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.